since you have been waiting so patiently, we're going to dive right in. So ironically, this is assessing implementations for architectural maturity. AV maturity is not in scope. Keep that in mind when you give us your feedback. My name is Zane Turner, and I'm joined by Jun Pei, and we'll talk a little bit more about who we are. And of course, we have to be responsible citizens and say, if you are making purchasing decisions, you need to make them based on our currently available technology, not any future-looking statements that Jun or I might be making here today, and we will be taking you into the future. So, are we all prepared? Excellent. Okay, Jun, you're driving the slides?
Yes, I am. All right, so I'll probably start introducing you. Well, to be honest, she needs no introduction. Here you go. It is Zane Turner. But for those who don't know, Zane Turner basically drives well-architected and pushes for better architecture in the whole Salesforce ecosystem.
And Jun warned me that he wanted to introduce me and that then I would have to come up with an introduction for Jun. So if you don't know Jun Pei, he lives in Melbourne, Australia, and he is actually not only a certified technical architect, but he is part of our infrastructure and availability engineering team, which means he is often troubleshooting very complex cases to figure out the root cause of what might be happening across very large sets of systems. And that's a key part of why we're working together on these assessments, and we'll see why.
Cool.
Okay. So today, we are going to move you through the concept of what do we mean when we're talking about assessment, when we think about maturity, just sort of unpacking our mindset as we're building out these capabilities. Then we're going to take you behind the scenes and show you a little bit of how we've gotten to where we are today. Then Jun's going to show you exactly where we are today. And we're going to talk about where we want to go next and give you an opportunity to weigh in, help shape the future, tell us what's valuable, what's not, help shape this new capability that we're hoping to bring to you all. Ready?
Yep.
Okay, so if you haven't heard about it, Salesforce Well Architected is prescriptive standards for what good looks like across Salesforce technologies. It is also a prioritized way of approaching solution design, to some extent troubleshooting, and we're going to talk about that. And it's built on guidance and supported by not only experts at Salesforce within our engineering org and our product org, but experts in the field, people that are actually still working on implementations day to day, so that we're connecting sort of the two halves of where the product is going and what is technically capable today with how is it behaving in the real world. And we bring that to you not just in white papers, but in very specific patterns, aka what good looks like, and anti-patterns, what problematic looks like. And we're up to, I think, more than 700 patterns and anti-patterns across the breadth of core CRM, Data Cloud, and now Gen AI. Which is great, but when we look at then the next step of, you all have told us many times, it's wonderful to have well architected, we didn't have that before, but now I'm trying to use it to say, assess, are we doing the right thing? Did we do the right thing? How do I measure a real world implementation, the decisions that might have been made before I came onto the scene or decisions that I'm making as the architect in seat? It's hard to apply well architected because it's manual right now, right? It's a bunch of, I have to go through those hundreds of patterns and anti-patterns to try to figure out how can I detect them, what do they look like if it's not just a code signature, some of that is complex. Does it apply to my business? It's great that well architected is prioritized, but what actually matters? If there are like 50 things wrong, are all 50 things on fire, or is only one of them on fire? And then what does normal look like? It's one thing to have a prescriptive set of guidance that says, well, don't do this particular kind of thing in code, but again, does that matter as much as then something else that might be happening in my landscape? And it's a lot of folks right now having to just still rely on the knowledge that you might have from your lived experience to put well architected into practice. So that's what we're looking to change.
And to be honest, when Zane actually came to us, and talked about this potential issue that we want to make well architected measurable, it is a very exciting topic. At the same time, to me, it's actually a little bit terrifying because it's one thing to define a framework of what is good look like, but it's another thing to make it measurable against what you have. So we actually ended up going on a little journey where we do the whole major translation of a framework into very defined yes or no type question answers that will allow you to say, yes, you're doing this right, or no, you're not doing this. And it had to be very prescriptive. In certain parts, it needs to be quantitative. It needs to be verifiable. And what are we verifying it against? We need to have proper evidence. It's not just like, oh, yeah, I'm doing this. Oh, no, I'm not doing this. You need to say, this proves that I'm doing it right.
Yeah.
And this is not just org metadata. It also goes across outside of the system, process documentation, design standards. We need to cover all that.
Because that's what's in those patterns and anti-patterns, something that if you've heard us talk about well-architected before, our framework had to be different because the topography of Salesforce technology is very different than an infrastructure provider. People are doing different kinds of things with a suite of applications versus an infrastructure service. So our well-architected covers what's happening in your automation as well as what's happening in your business continuity plan. So it is a mix of things that are qualitative and quantitative, even in the nature of the patterns and anti-patterns, which then becomes a big surface area and a very different kind of surface area to try to quantify consistently.
And then after that, with all that, we also need to put some reasonable way of whether we just trust what the customers' businesses are giving us versus we need to actually go in and verify, yet they're doing that exactly right. And sometimes we may need to do both because it may be, you may be thinking that, yes, I'm doing this, but when we actually go in and check the system, you realize that actually you may not be. You may not realize that you are doing something wrong. So we need to sometimes also weigh these checks and balances in different ways into account and taking all this complexity into account. But what it does is as we do all this, it starts to form the concept of foundation of a well-architected assessment. And as we then do that, we need to really understand why are we doing an assessment, what we should be doing, and what we shouldn't be doing.
Because as we looked at this and we talked with folks who were eager for this, there were sort of different expectations of what an assessment should give you or let you do. So we're sort of putting out our, again, opinionated prescriptive view of what we want you to think about when you think about an assessment. So again, it should cover the implementation design as well as what's running, proactive and reactive, what I have today, what I'm building next. It should be an opinionated view, but it should let you also customize it, make it relevant for a business because businesses are different. It should give you a baseline and let you track changes over time. And of course, it should help you meaningfully prioritize what work to go after if there's work to be done. But what we don't think people should expect an assessment to do is that you just do it once, I got my check, everything was green, I'm perfect, and I'm done. We also don't think it should be a scorecard that is like, I'm trying for a 10, I'm gonna get a 10, I want a 10, right? That's not the nature of systems. They're dynamic, they change, again, because of business context. Maybe an 8 for somebody else is better than a 9 for somebody else. A 4 could be sometimes healthy. We know that that ambiguity is still in the system, so we're not building a scorecard. We're also not giving you a task list, sorry. You can't just run the assessment and then be like, okay, development team, here is your set of tasks, check them and then be done. And it's also not a measure of your competence as an architectural practitioner. This is not a judgment on bad decisions that might have been made in the past or today, because we know that context changes. And something that was correct a while ago may be incorrect today. And it's not a healthy sort of feedback loop to have people start thinking that just because we flagged something as problematic, it means we've done bad things. And so, in addition to what we should do or not do with an assessment, when we say we're not going to score, we have to give you something meaningful to judge where you are. There needs to be some way of wrapping your head around what's happening. So we landed on trying to go for architectural maturity. And there's sort of two paradigms for that. One, there's great models out there. Other frameworks that might call themselves well-architected also have a similar approach of let's talk about maturity versus just 8, 10, red, yellow, green. But for us, we also wanted to have a maturity level that is not just so simplistic that it's meaningless. Because several different kinds of companies and customers use Salesforce, again, we have to sort of benchmark on what should you be going for. The goal of an architectural maturity end state is not to always be at the mature state for everything all the time. Because again, it's dynamic, it might change. For some businesses, you might be over-engineering to insist that they get to mature on a capability that isn't as relevant to them. And you know that is a huge part of your job. So we wanted to build this maturity spectrum that flags really what is, bottom line, always unacceptable. Where can you just know there's no debate from a Salesforce opinion, we think nobody should live there. And then what might be a baseline sort of minimum level of hygiene, and then as a different customer context gets into the picture, where can you flag we're at an unacceptable level of maturity based on the risk tolerance of the business, based on the KPIs we need to go after, so that, again, you can prioritize meaningfully.
And with that, all that we've talked about, we start to try and put something to work. And yes, we have to build a very, very, very complex spreadsheet in order to test out the idea really quickly. And we're also testing around how architects can follow sort of a workflow to build it into their day-to-day work in using the assessment. So it's a very crude demo. I would like to show it to you quickly.
Yeah. Yes. We're showing you the spreadsheet. This is radical transparency here. And if I heard Christian boo, think about working on the spreadsheet, okay?
So
yeah.
Obviously, we're starting with this assessment. We've decided that reliable is what we will first start with, because it's basically my focus area. And we document that, we think that we believe that these are the different levels, and right now, we have a very, very crude idea of what type of customer should be at which level.
Yep.
Of course, it's all up for debate. But more importantly, and it comes into the workflow itself. So the first thing is, an architect would go to the business or the customer and say, look, I'm going to need this information from you. It's very specific. What type of documentation? In this case, your risk assessment, your failure mitigation plan, your design standards. And we ask the customer to provide those documentations. And we really want to specify on documentation, because we believe that if it's documented, then your team is most likely to avoid it. You can technically say, oh, yeah, I'm doing this, but it's kind of like hard to say that, oh, yeah, is it gone through your whole team?
Well, and it goes back to the point of maturity, right? It's one thing for a stakeholder in the business to tell you, oh, yeah, we got continuity plans, but if they can't find them, that is likely a signal of maybe there is a maturity gap there.
Yes. And let's say, for example, then your customer or your business is going to go and collect all this for you. Then you would go into the back end of the system and say, okay, I'm going to validate through your metadata, your platform usage, and you start to check off, are you actually doing these things? Are you detecting some bad patterns already? And you start to document all that, and you fill in the answer as you go, as well as based on the level of maturity, you can, it basically tries to give you a sort of a guidance of what type of recommendation, but we do not want you to copy paste those, because you need to be very specific. For example, if you detect a certain anti-pattern in this Apex class, in this line, then it's best to specify it there now so that you can document this recommendation when you present it back to your business.
Yeah, so these two tabs are essentially, the first tab that Jun showed you is the qualitative business understanding stuff. And then we get to the quantitative things that are, assuming there's a live implementation, go to these tools, check for these things. Based on what you find, we're going to provide the default sort of, here's the guidance you're likely going to need to give to the customer. But again, the users of this, and we're going to talk about who those people are, they still need to kind of fill in that like last, let's call it quarter mile, which is like this particular flow or this particular Apex class, which would be provided by that tool itself. They'll know the problematic classes based on what we're guiding you to do in all of these tools.
And you notice that this is very specific, where we actually say you will validate it this way, and if you don't see this, it's this maturity level. It's really prescriptive, so there's no ambiguity involved. Right.
And so if we go to the full assessment results now, you're going to see it's a lot. So, and you'll notice this on the next two tabs. This gets to the idea of we had to balance, we're not building a flat score. We're trying to provide transparency against, okay, you're asking a lot of questions, you're synthesizing a lot of information. We're going to let you see, for every question you ask, based on the maturity level you've rated, there might be a default recommendation, there's a level of like, is this a risk or not provided? But then an architect needs to take that, and then, yes, the assessment summary is going to synthesize it together into a view of, okay, where are the overall trends? And again, this is just trying to be transparent. The opinionated part of this is that we're already giving you those maturity levels. We're already saying based on what you see, this is the maturity level that the customer is benchmarking at. From here, what do we do?
From here, so really this is kind of like our real first rough draft, and we're going to test it to make it as easy as possible. And we're testing it in two ways, if I can find the presentation. Sorry.
No problem.
This is where...
Just scroll the slide. You're fine.
Yes.
It's cool.
Cool.
We're among friends.
That's if my laptop actually responds. Technology, right? It's also worth calling out, right? It is a lot. Right now, we've only done it for reliable, and it's 61 checks across 41 questions. So imagine we have to go to the rest of the framework. It's quite a lot. So we need to do two things. The first thing is we really need to test it. And we have partnered with our success team, and they have integrated this assessment into one of their signature success offering, which is the reliability review. And the idea is that we will have architects that will actually test out this framework with customers in order to really thresh it out and iron out any issues.
That's right. And that's one of the reasons we have it in a spreadsheet, because we want those architects to be able to give us radical amounts of feedback and for us to be able to turn it around fairly quickly, iterate on that prototype together. And the reason we wanted to pilot with architects is because of all of those places you saw where we still need an expert in the loop to provide some sort of judgment about, okay, this is actually the thing I need to flag for a customer. You've told me these 5 things are at risk. Based on what I know about this customer, I need to still prioritize them based on my judgment of their business.
And then, I know we need to move away from the spreadsheet, but it's actually more than that. We want to actually make it really easy, because ultimately assessment is not done once.
That's right.
We need it to be repeatable, and if it's manual, it's not going to be repeatable.
You should probably let that build go.
Yes, and it's also thinking about it, automation is not just going to enable assessment. It is going to be a capability that can then be built and then federated and then used by across the ecosystem, right?
Yeah, so when we think about that middle tab that June showed you with the kind of maroon color checks, if we know by going into XYZ tools and doing ABC things and that these things are good, bad, or indifferent, we should be able to make that a non-manual step. This is the baseline of automation that we're talking about. And what if we could do that then in a way that is reusable, that's open, that is not just then another destination you have to go to, but is in fact a capability that we could start delivering more and more and more features against.
We're going to have to really take on this journey one at a time, and we're taking a kind of like a crawl, walk, run approach. With crawling, we're going to start with using what we have learned. We've got prior models where other tools has already done some of the specific anti-pattern check. If we are able to then use the same approach and grab it and make it into this context for well-characterized assessment, as well as building this automation that is fireable at any time, that will allow us to do a lot more.
Yeah, and I'm fast forwarding us just a little bit because I'm looking at the clock.
Yep.
So crawl is basically, like you said, let's automate, detect what we know is already there.
Yep.
And then when we get to walk, this is then sort of connecting the two halves of our world. As I mentioned earlier, June is part of an internal team that has deep awareness of, we have more than 2 decades of running a very successful software business. That's a capability that Salesforce engineering has. And there is a lot of AI that they are now using to look at how we're deploying, managing, running our own services. There are a lot of qualitative and quantitative data points that engineering knows about, that is how our services are running, what optimal health looks like. But it's connecting that to then a specific customer's implementation, bridging those two things. We know this is the exact impact it's having at the infrastructure level, and we can also do better prediction of what maybe a solve might do. And then, of course, at the end, of course, AI is going to solve all of our problems, right? But it is the fact that then as we can start getting not just predictive, but sort of generative capabilities across these maybe different graphs that we're combining. And we're not going to do this in sort of a waterfall approach. We're starting with reliable because there's also richer data there. There's better sort of infrastructure engineering telemetry on our side. So as we start moving some of these capabilities across maturity, we might be able to leapfrog stages as we expand across well-architected. But we want to ensure that wherever we are moving, it's directionally correct first, and then we're expanding from there.
And I think it's also worth calling out as we go through this, we also need to address any of the risks and perception that may have, especially with the adoption of AI. Customers may be a bit worried around giving all these design standards or process documents to an AI to evaluate because AI may end up using it, or that there's a risk of hallucination that would render the results of an assessment not trustable. We need to solve these questions one at a time.
Absolutely, because sometimes your customization is considered data to a customer, not metadata. So we have to sort of figure out the right way to cross that bridge. So here, this is a very important slide.
We are, and the next session starts in 6 minutes, and we have to clear the next.
Thank you. In the last 10 seconds, I'm going to finish my talk track and say, please scan this code and give us feedback on where we're going to go with our beta. And we're so sorry that we had a delay in our AV. That meant I'm going up to the last second. But scan this slide. Please give us your feedback. And thank you, everyone on Plus, who may or may not be hearing me say thanks for joining us as well. Take care.
Thank you.